I'm just, really fascinated with where doing this comes from. Like, why, just that idea of these are really good conversations that we have. Like, I selfishly want to document them, but I also think it'd be cool to share them. And there's not any deeper strategic playbook, show business, what others have, there's no deeper thought about it other than let's hang out and talk about what's going on and see where it goes. And I don't know, I'd be curious if there were other shows like that, podcasts, whatever, how I would react.
I'm sure there are.
I'd be curious if anybody, has seen other things like that.
I'm sure
to share them, because
pretty small like ours too.
Yeah.
Like, I think you just kind of organically develop a
right. And I mean, like, if you think about it, some of my favorite podcasts, like obviously, if you watch, just in general, like a Joe Rogan podcast, a Smartless podcast, a Rick Rubin podcast, they have a general idea based on the guest, sort of things that they're curious about, especially because they're getting to know each other sometimes for the first time, right? And maybe with someone like a Joe Rogan interviewing a prominent figure, like there's sort of like, well, we got to hit on these things because it's part of the cultural zeitgeist right now, where my audience is going to be frustrated if we don't mention this thing that is, happening right now. What's interesting about us is obviously we're friends. We've been friends for a long time. And, I don't need to like, well, how did you start out as a photographer? How did you start out? And, we don't need to do the origin story, every time we have an episode. So you have a different experience where you are sort of doing an origin story because you're really peeling back these layers, especially me being so like treating this sometimes like a bit of therapy. But
we're also just not very funny people. So, like, I think there's a lot of podcasts where you have two buddies that have known each other for a long time. And it is more of a comedy podcast, and they're just really funny.
And there's certain, friends of mine where, my comedy tendencies come up more than with you. And that doesn't mean that I don't crack jokes, especially when we're off camera. But I'm attracted to you in our conversations because, a lot of it's grounded in, the work that we do or the work that we consume of others, the books that we're reading. And to a certain extent, especially with me, just talking about, psychological aspects of, why we as people or me as a person does what I do on a daily basis. And I don't know that I get to talk about that with too many other people because I'm usually the one hearing from them why they do stuff or why they're struggling with this or that. So it is interesting and for me to be able to relate it to making work or creating content or doing the show or, pursuing the arts, all of that stuff and the struggles that come up for me, especially in the context of books that we're reading, novels that we're reading, shows that we're watching, movies that we're consuming, etc. And just to double back to that sort of the patterns that develop, we have episodes where it is a little bit more about why do I do this? I as in us or me as in me personally. Like, why am I drawn to this or why do I make these choices? Why do I want to post this or make a video that's like this? Why do I want to talk about these things in this sort of public forum? Or, we just read, a book on ontology and we're going to go, we're just going to basically have an exchange about what our takeaways were from it. And you're going to illuminate things maybe I overlooked and vice versa and just go ham on it.
I think it's interesting. One thing you said about the public forum is like, both of us are probably private people in a sense, but I'm like pretty. I think my personality type is just pretty private, reserved.
Absolutely.
In most things, and it is funny. I don't really think about this as being a public forum, but it totally is.
Yeah.
That's just it's interesting to me that
sort of ends up in one, although I don't.
It's not, and I don't have that connection until you point it out.
Yeah.
In an obvious way, like, oh, this is a public forum,
right?
It's like, there's definitely other people that aren't us watching or listening. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's just better that I just, push that out and don't really think about that. But
I do think that part of why I talk about some of those more psychological things, why I do this or this struggle with this or whatever, is because that's what I crave to hear in the content I consume. Mm-hmm. But in a way where it's not, again, self-indulgent or masturbatory, like, I just got to unload all my stuff because I just need to clear up the blockages and I need to signal that I'm working on things and all of that. I'm sure there's some motivations in there, conscious or subconscious, that, some might observe and be like, this guy really likes to talk about himself or sort of what he's going through or what his struggles are. But I think I'm drawn to that too, going back to this idea of like making a show, mm-hmm. because sometimes consciously, sometimes I think subconsciously, this is the type of stuff I want to hear from other people. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, one thing when I listen to podcasts and listen to people talk, whether it's a Rick Rubin or, and somebody he's interviewing, a Smartless, whatever, I'm always going, you all have reached this level of success, a high level of success to varying degrees, right? Character actor and, and this or that, a prolific music producer, some people, their sort of artistic footprint is much, much more vast. Some it's a little bit smaller as far as the real estate they occupy in show business. But I've always been like, where are the podcasts about the people that are like in the middle, struggling?
They just have such low viewership.
Yeah, right. But then part of me also goes, if they're out there though, how do I find them? Mm-hmm. What tools are there to have somebody be like, hey, you should check out this podcast from mm-hmm. these sort of, I don't know, normal is not the right word, but people that are that are in the thick of it, or they're not. And not to take away from the people I'm referring to, Rick Rubin or those guys on Smartless, because they're in a struggle.
They're Rick Rubin and those guys on Smartless. So
these are the two podcasts I've been listening to most in the last couple of weeks. Although I have a range of them that I listen to, it's like right there at the forefront. But where are those? Where's that community with people that are in a similar situation to me? Yeah. And maybe talking about the things I talk about is, there's some hope that you're going to connect with them and that they're making stuff too that I can then go watch, listen to, or consume.
It had been a golden afternoon, and I remember having the familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer and summer.